The crystal stemware caught the light just right, creating tiny prisms across the ivory tablecloth. I traced one with my fingertip, wondering how something so beautiful could exist in the same moment as something so ugly. The murmur of conversations around our table at Le Petit Jardin felt distant, dreamlike. As if I were underwater watching a scene play out above the surface. Julia. Greg's voice cut through the haze. Are you even listening? I looked up at my husband of 25 years, studying his flushed face, the slight loosening of his tie. The way his third glass of champagne teetered dangerously close to the edge of the table. The signs had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to read them. Of course I'm listening, dear. You were talking about the merger. Rachel, my best friend since college, touched Greg's arm. Let her be. She's probably just processing all the excitement. That touch. So casual, so familiar. My stomach clenched. Actually, Greg straightened in his chair, commanding attention from our table of 8, colleagues, friends, our daughter Megan. I have another announcement to make. Megan caught my eye from across the table, her expression worried. She'd been quiet all evening, picking at her food, checking her phone. Now I wondered if she knew something I didn't. This promotion isn't just about career advancement, Greg continued, his words slightly slurred. It's about new beginnings. Fresh starts. Rachel's hand was still on his arm. Mom. Megan's voice was barely a whisper. I've realized something important, Greg said, standing now, swaying slightly. Life's too short to live a lie. And Julia, he turned to me, his eyes glazed with alcohol and something else. Something final. Julia, I can't do this anymore. The prisms on the tablecloth blurred. I gripped my napkin under the table, twisting it until my knuckles went white. Greg, maybe this isn't the best time, Rachel started, but he waved her off. No, it's the perfect time. Everyone's here. Everyone should know. He raised his glass. I'm in love with Rachel. Have been for months. And we're going to be together. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum, sucking all the air from the room. Someone gasped, probably Sandra from accounting. A fork clattered against china. Megan pushed her chair back with a screech that seemed to echo forever. You bastard, she spat, then turned to Rachel. And you've been at our house for Sunday dinners. You helped plan my graduation party. How could you? I should have said something. Should have screamed or cried or thrown my wine in their faces. Instead, I sat there, watching the prisms dance, thinking about how Rachel had helped me pick out this dress last week. How she'd insisted on this restaurant for Greg's promotion dinner. How she'd known all along, that this was how it would end. Julia. Greg's voice again, softer now, almost apologetic. Say something. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. The room had gone still, every eye on me, waiting for the scene, the drama, the tears. But 25 years of marriage had taught me something about dignity. About patience. About revenge. Congratulations on the promotion, Greg, I said, my voice steady. I hope it was worth it. I walked out of Le Petit Jardin that night with my daughter's arm linked through mine, leaving behind my marriage, my best friend. And any illusion of trust I'd ever had. But I took something else with me, something that would prove far more valuable in the months to come, knowledge. Knowledge of Greg's business dealings, of Rachel's manipulations, of secrets they thought were safe with me. They had no idea what they'd just started. 3 days after the restaurant disaster, I sat at my kitchen counter. Staring at an open laptop and a stack of papers that seemed to mock me with their pristine organization. Rachel's handwriting decorated the margins of our shared charity committee notes. Little hearts dotted her eyes, for God's sake. 20 years of friendship documented in meeting minutes and event plans. The front door clicked open. Mom. Megan's voice carried through the house. I brought coffee and those almond croissants you like. In the kitchen, I called back, quickly wiping my eyes. Just sorting through some paperwork. Megan appeared, 2 paper cups in hand, her work blazer slightly wrinkled. She took one look at the spread before me and set the coffee down harder than necessary. You're torturing yourself. I'm being practical. The winter fundraiser. Screw the fundraiser. She pulled up a stool beside me. And screw Rachel Carter. Let her organize her own damn charity events. I reached for the coffee, needing something to do with my hands. It's not that simple. These organizations depend on. My phone buzzed. Rachel's name lit up the screen. Don't answer it, Megan said. I answered it. Julia. Rachel's voice was soft, practiced. I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about the situation with the foundation. The situation. I tasted the words like bitter medicine. Is that what we're calling it? Please. I know you're hurt, but... Hurt. A laugh escaped me, sharp and foreign. Rachel, you helped me pick out lingerie for our anniversary 3 months ago. You told me which wine to serve at the dinner where my husband announced he was leaving me for you. So no, I don't think we need to talk about the foundation. This isn't just about us anymore. There are responsibilities, commitments. Mom, Megan whispered, pointing at my laptop screen. A new email had just appeared, from Laura, Rachel's daughter. I have to go, I told Rachel, hanging up before she could respond. The email was short. Julia, I found something you should see. Meet me at Riverside Park, near the boat rental. 4 p.m. today. Come alone. Please don't tell my mother. It's probably a trap, Megan said, reading over my shoulder. Rachel's using her own daughter to manipulate you. I thought about Laura, how she'd looked at the restaurant that night, horrified, ashamed. How she tried to catch my eye as I left, but I'd been too shocked to acknowledge her. I'm going. Then I'm coming with you. No. I closed the laptop. Laura specifically asked me to come alone. She's caught in the middle of this too. That's exactly why you shouldn't trust her. Mom, think about it. Dad and Rachel have already shown they're capable of anything. What if? The doorbell interrupted her. We both froze. Through the front window, I could see Greg standing on the porch. Shifting from foot to foot like he used to do when we were dating, and he'd show up unannounced with flowers and apologies for being late. I'll get rid of him, Megan started toward the door, but I caught her arm. No. I need to handle this. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my hair. Would you mind giving us a minute? Megan's jaw clenched, but she nodded. I'll be upstairs. Yell if you need me to call the police. I opened the door just as Greg raised his hand to ring again. He looked terrible, unshaven, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. Julia, he said, I need your help. Funny how that works. He glanced past me into the house. Can I come in? Please. There's something you need to know about Rachel. About what's really going on. I should have slammed the door in his face. Should have told him to take his secrets and his guilt and his problems back to his new life with my former best friend. Instead, I found myself stepping aside. Sometimes the path to revenge requires walking straight through hell. You have 5 minutes, I told him. Make them count. The flash drive felt impossibly small in my palm, such a tiny thing to contain so much destruction. Laura had been right about everything. The financial records, the doctored reports, the private emails between Rachel and the board members. It was all there, wrapped in a neat digital package. I sat in my car outside Riverside Park, watching the sun sink behind the city skyline. Laura's words still echoed in my head. Mom's been planning this for over a year. The promotion, the affair, it was all calculated. She needed Greg's position to access certain accounts, and she needed you out of the way. My phone buzzed. Greg again. His revelation yesterday about Rachel's involvement in his company's offshore accounts had been the first piece. Laura's evidence was the second. Now I had to decide what to do with this knowledge. A tap on my window made me jump. Megan stood there, arms crossed. "I followed you," she said after I rolled down the window. "And before you lecture me about trust, remember who just had a secret meeting with Laura Carter. Get in." She circled around and slid into the passenger seat. "So?" I handed her the flash drive. "Your father's not just a cheater. He's a criminal. And Rachel's been orchestrating everything." Megan plugged the drive into her phone, her expression darkening as she scrolled through the files. "Holy shit. These transfer amounts. Mom, this is serious money laundering." "I know. We have to turn them in. It's not that simple." I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "If this goes public, your father goes to prison. Rachel too." "Good. And what about Laura? She betrayed her own mother to get us this information. If Rachel finds out." A black SUV pulled into the parking spot next to us. Rachel stepped out, her designer heels crunching on the gravel. "Shit," Megan whispered. Rachel tapped on my window, her smile sharp as a blade. "Julia, darling. We need to talk." I lowered the window an inch. "I have nothing to say to you." "No? Not even about the interesting conversation you just had with my daughter?" Her smile never wavered. "Or about the files you're currently in possession of?" My blood ran cold. "How did you?" "Laura's a good girl, but she's terrible at covering her digital tracks. Now, why don't we discuss this like adults? There's a lovely wine bar around the corner." "Go to hell," Megan snapped. Rachel's eyes hardened. "Julia, you have exactly two choices right now. We can handle this privately, or I can make a call that will ensure Greg takes full responsibility for everything on that drive. Your choice." "You'd throw him under the bus?" I asked. "Just like that. Business is business. Love is negotiable." She stepped back, gesturing toward the street. "Shall we?" I started to open my door, but Megan grabbed my arm. "Mom, don't. She's bluffing." But I saw something in Rachel's eyes, something I recognized from 20 years of friendship. She wasn't bluffing. She was desperate. "Give me your phone," I told Megan. "What? Why?" "Because I need you to take these files somewhere safe while I keep Rachel occupied." "Can you do that?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. She handed me her phone, pocketing the flash drive. "Be careful." I got out of the car, watching Megan drive away before turning to Rachel. "Lead the way." As we walked toward the wine bar, Rachel linked her arm through mine like we were still best friends. "You know, Julia, this could have all been so much easier if you just signed those foundation papers last month. The ones giving me full control of the accounts. The ones you forged my signature on anyway." She missed a step, her perfectly maintained facade cracking for just a moment. "How did you?" "You're not the only one with sources, Rachel." I pulled away from her. "And you're not the only one who's been planning." The wine bar's neon sign flickered ahead of us, casting Rachel's face in alternating light and shadow. For the first time since this all began, I saw fear in her eyes. Good. She should be afraid. Because revenge, like business, is negotiable. And I was just getting started. The coffee shop buzzed with morning activity, but the man sitting across from me remained perfectly still. His fingers laced around his untouched cappuccino. Michael Reed had Greg's same expensive taste in watches, but that's where the similarities ended. Your husband cost me everything, he said, sliding a folder across the table. The whistleblower investigation, the media circus, it was all engineered to protect him. I was just the convenient scapegoat. I opened the folder, scanning documents that painted a familiar pattern. Rachel's fingerprints are all over this too. She was very thorough. Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. But not thorough enough to notice what I kept. My phone vibrated, another message from Rachel. I'd left her at the wine bar last night after she'd revealed more than she intended. She'd been trying to reach me ever since. Why come to me now? I asked, closing the folder. Because you're the only other person who understands what they're capable of. He leaned forward. And because your daughter's foundation is their next target. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. Megan's foundation. But that's just a small non-profit for supporting underprivileged college students, yes. With a surprisingly large endowment for such a new organization. He pulled up something on his phone. Did you know Rachel joined the board last month? That's impossible. Megan would never. Megan doesn't know. The paperwork was processed through a shell company. One of many Rachel's been setting up using Greg's corporate credentials. The bell above the door chimed. Laura Carter walked in, spotted us, and froze. Before I could react, she turned and hurried out. Interesting, Michael murmured. Does Rachel know her daughter's been helping you? We need to go. Now. Outside, Laura was already halfway down the block. I caught up to her at the crosswalk. They know, she said without turning around. Mom found the backup files I made. She's meeting with Greg right now to decide what to do. Laura. I had to warn you. She finally faced me, her eyes red-rimmed. They're going to frame Megan for the foundation fraud. Make it look like she's been embezzling money since the beginning. Michael appeared beside us. When? The documentation goes to the board tonight. Mom's calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Laura's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Julia. I tried to stop it, but... Miss Carter. A man in a dark suit approached, flashing a badge. I'm Detective Morrison. We need to ask you some questions about certain financial irregularities. Two more suits materialized behind him. Rachel's insurance policy, right on schedule. I stepped between them and Laura. She's not going anywhere without a lawyer. Mom's already at the station, Laura whispered. Isn't she? The detective's silence was answer enough. Michael touched my arm. Julia, we need to move fast. If Rachel's already making her play. Take Laura to Megan, I cut him off. Get them both somewhere safe. I'll handle Rachel. Julia. I know what I'm doing. I met his gaze. Trust me. He nodded slowly, then guided Laura toward his car. The detective started to protest, but I held up my hand. Detective Morrison, I assume you'd be interested in evidence of actual financial crimes. The kind that make foundation irregularities look like pocket change. He studied me carefully. I'm listening. Good. But first, I need to make a call. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to Greg's number. It's time my ex-husband remembered exactly who he married. Because Rachel wasn't the only one who'd been planning for the long game. She wasn't the only one who knew how to manipulate the pieces on the board. And she definitely wasn't the only one willing to burn everything down to win. The difference was, I had nothing left to lose. Greg answered on the first ring. Julia. What? Hello, dear, I said, watching the detective's face. Let's talk about offshore accounts. The police station's interrogation room felt smaller with each passing hour. Rachel sat across from me, her perfect makeup starting to crack around the edges, while Detective Morrison reviewed the documents spread between us. So you're telling me, Rachel said, her voice tight, that you've been gathering evidence against your own husband? Against your daughter's father. Fascinating how you still think this is about Greg. Morrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Carter, let's focus on the foundation documents. Of course, Rachel smiled, all teeth. I'm simply concerned about Megan. Poor girl had no idea what she was getting into when she started this foundation. My phone buzzed, a text from Michael, Megan and Laura safe. But Greg's not at the office or home. Rachel's eyes flickered to my phone. Trouble in paradise. Before I could respond, the door opened. Greg burst in, followed by two officers trying to stop him. His tie was loose, his usual polished appearance shattered. You can't do this, he said, looking at me. Julia, whatever you think you know. Mr. Thompson, Morrison stood. This is a closed interview. Interview. Greg laughed, harsh and hollow. My wife is trying to destroy everything we've built. She's using our daughter's foundation to. Ex-wife, I corrected quietly. And I'm not the one who tried to frame our daughter for fraud. Rachel's composure slipped. You have no proof of that. I pulled out my phone, played the recording from our wine bar conversation. Rachel's voice filled the room, and once the board sees those doctored transactions under Megan's signature. Greg's face went pale. Rachel, what did you do? What you were too weak to do yourself. She stood so quickly her chair clattered backward. You wanted power. Respect. I handed it to you on a silver platter. All you had to do was follow the plan. By destroying my daughter. By destroying Julia. She was always in the way, always so perfect, so trusted. Rachel's mascara left black tracks down her cheeks. Do you know what it's like to stand in someone's shadow for 20 years? To watch them take everything you deserve. Morrison signaled the officers. Mrs. Carter, I think we're done here. Wait. I stood. There's something else you should see. I pulled out the final document, the one Michael had given me, showing Rachel's connection to his downfall 5 years ago. Greg recognized it immediately. The whistleblower case, he whispered. That was you. Rachel's laugh turned hysterical. Of course it was me. Michael Reed was getting too close to the truth. Someone had to stop him. And you, she turned to me, you think you've won. You think this ends here? No, I said softly. It ends at tomorrow's gala. Where every board member, every investor, every friend who watched you humiliate me will learn exactly who you are. The officers moved to handcuff Rachel, but she jerked away. Greg, tell them. Tell them about the offshore accounts, about the real fraud. Tell them what you did. Greg looked at me, then at Morrison. 25 years of marriage let me read the defeat in his shoulders before he spoke. I'll cooperate fully, detective. In exchange for immunity for my daughter. Rachel screamed. Actually screamed. As they led her away, she turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Julia. I swear to God, you'll regret this. In the sudden quiet, Greg slumped against the wall. What happens now? Now. I gathered my things, avoiding his eyes. Now I go home to our daughter, who you were willing to sacrifice. And you? You get to live with that knowledge for the rest of your life. Morrison held the door for me. Mrs. Thompson. We'll need you back here tomorrow to finalize your statement. After the gala, I said. There's something I need to finish first. Because Rachel was right about one thing, this wasn't over. The gala would be my final act of revenge, my chance to ensure that everyone knew the truth. But standing there, watching Greg's broken expression, seeing Rachel's mascara-stained face as they led her away, I wondered if revenge would taste as sweet as I'd imagined. Tomorrow would tell. The gala ballroom glittered with false promises, just like the smile I forced onto my face. Michael stood at my elbow, adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous tell I'd noticed over our weeks of planning. Rachel made bail an hour ago, he murmured. Security's on alert, but she'll find a way in. I smoothed my black dress, feeling the USB drive secured in its hidden pocket. She always does. Across the room, Greg worked the crowd, his charm cranked to maximum. Only someone who knew him well would notice the sweat at his temples, the slight tremor in his hands as he lifted his champagne glass. Mom. Megan appeared beside me, Laura close behind her. The board members are all here. It's time. I touched the USB drive again, thinking of the documents it contained. Evidence of not just Rachel's crimes, but Greg's willing participation. The affair had been the least of their betrayals. Mrs. Thompson. A security guard approached. There's a situation at the entrance. Mrs. Carter is demanding to be let in. Let her come, I said. In fact, make sure everyone sees her arrive. The guard hesitated, then nodded. Minutes later, Rachel stormed in, her designer dress slightly wrinkled, her eyes wild. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Julia. Her voice carried across the ballroom. Did you really think this would work? I stepped forward, aware of every eye on us. Rachel, you're making a scene. No, you're making a mistake. She pulled out her phone. Check your email. All of you, check your emails right now. The room filled with the sound of notifications. Michael's face went pale as he read his screen. Julia. I opened my own email and felt the floor drop out from under me. There, in pristine detail, was evidence of my own financial misconduct, transactions I'd never made. Documents bearing my signature that I'd never signed. Did you really think Rachel's smile was vicious, that you were the only one gathering evidence? That you were the only one with a plan? Greg moved through the crowd toward us. Rachel, stop this. Stop. Oh no, darling. I'm just getting started. She turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Julia Thompson isn't the victim she pretends to be. She's been embezzling from her daughter's foundation for years. And I can prove it. That's a lie. Megan stepped forward, but Laura grabbed her arm. Mom, Laura's voice shook. What did you do? Rachel's laugh was brittle. What did I do? I protected myself. Just like Julia taught me. 20 years of friendship, and do you know what I learned? Always have a backup plan. I reached for the USB drive, but Rachel shook her head. Go ahead, show them your evidence. But ask yourself, who will they believe? The bitter ex-wife with suspicious financial records, or the concerned friend who uncovered her fraud? The room had gone deadly quiet. Board members whispered among themselves. Greg looked between us, his face unreadable. Julia, Michael touched my arm. We need to. No. I pulled away from him. This ends now. I walked to the center of the room, facing Rachel directly. You're right. I did learn from you. I learned how to watch, how to wait, how to plan. I turned to the crowd. And I learned never to keep all my evidence in one place. I nodded to Laura, who pulled out her own phone. Now, daughter dearest, Rachel's smile faltered. What are you doing? Showing them the truth, Laura said, her voice stronger now. The real records. The ones you kept on your home computer. Rachel lunged for her daughter, but security intercepted her. In the chaos that followed, Rachel's screams, Greg's attempted intervention, the board members' shocked exclamations, I felt strangely hollow. Because revenge wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to leave me standing in a room full of broken people, watching my daughter witness her father's arrest. Seeing Laura collapse into tears as her mother was led away again. Julia, Michael said softly. It's over. But it wasn't over. The damage was done, the wounds were deep, and the cost. The cost was higher than I'd ever imagined. The question was, could any of us survive the aftermath? The police station's interview room felt colder at midnight. Greg sat across from me, his lawyer hovering nearby, while Detective Morrison reviewed Laura's evidence on his laptop. There's one thing I don't understand, Greg said, his voice hoarse. Why didn't you just turn us in weeks ago? Because this was never about justice. I pushed Rachel's private ledger across the table. This was about truth. The door opened. Rachel stumbled in, escorted by 2 officers, her mascara now completely destroyed. You bitch. You absolute. Mrs. Carter, Morrison warned. Sit down. She collapsed into a chair, as far from Greg as possible. Laura betrayed me. My own daughter. No, I said quietly. You betrayed her. Just like you betrayed everyone else. Is that what you think? Rachel leaned forward. That this is some simple morality tale. Poor virtuous Julia, wronged by her evil friend. Mom, stop. Laura appeared in the doorway, Megan beside her. Both girls looked exhausted, aged beyond their years. Ladies, Morrison started, but I held up my hand. Let them stay. They deserve to hear this. Rachel's laugh was hollow. Hear what? More self-righteous. Hear about Thomas Reed, a new voice said. Michael stepped into the already crowded room. My brother. Greg went pale. Michael, don't. Thomas discovered the first evidence of fraud 5 years ago, Michael continued. Before he could report it, he died in what looked like a suicide. Rachel's composure cracked. That wasn't, I never meant. But you knew, I cut in. You knew Greg had threatened him. You helped cover it up. Just like you helped cover up everything else. Julia, Greg pleaded, you don't understand. Rachel said she could fix it. She promised. I protected you. Rachel screamed, lunging across the table. Officers rushed to restrain her. I protected all of us. And this is how you repay me. Protected us. Laura's voice shook. By destroying lives. By killing someone. Morrison closed his laptop. I think we have everything we need. Wait. I pulled out one final document. There's more. Rachel struggled against the officers. Nothing else matters now. We're all ready. It's not evidence, I said. It's a letter. From Thomas Reed to his brother, dated the day he died. He wrote about redemption, about second chances. I looked at Michael. About how sometimes the greatest revenge is choosing to be better than those who wronged you. The room went silent. Rachel's struggles ceased. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're both going to confess. To everything. The fraud, the cover-up, Thomas Reed's death. In return, the DA will consider leniency, not for you, but for the sake of your children. Mom, Megan whispered, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I stood, facing Rachel directly. Because 20 years ago, you were my best friend. And somewhere under all this, you're still Laura's mother. Just like Greg is still Megan's father. Greg's lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Greg waved him off. What do you want us to do? Tell the truth. All of it. Not for me, not for yourselves, but for them. I gestured to our daughters. Give them that much, at least. Rachel's shoulders slumped. All her carefully constructed defenses, all her manipulations and schemes, crumbled in the face of her daughter's tears. Laura, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I know, Mom. Laura's voice cracked. I know. As Morrison led them away to separate rooms for their statements, Michael touched my arm. Julia, are you sure about this? I watched Greg being escorted out, saw the defeated slump of his shoulders. Remembered the man he'd once been, the man our daughter still needed him to be, despite everything. Revenge doesn't heal anything, I said. I learned that watching you carry your brother's ghost all these years. Megan and Laura huddled together, united in their grief and relief. So what now? Michael asked. I took his hand, feeling the weight of the past few months finally begin to lift. Now we learn how to live with the truth. All of us. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemies, but in choosing not to become them. The Foundation's new office buzzed with morning activity. I stood at the window, watching volunteers unload supplies for the scholarship program, Megan's vision, rebuilt from the ashes of scandal. The board approved all the new applicants, Megan said, dropping a stack of files on her desk. 20 students starting next semester. Thomas Reed Memorial Scholarships, I murmured. Michael had insisted on the name, turning his brother's tragedy into something healing. The door chimed. Laura stepped in, carrying coffee and a newspaper. Have you seen this? The headline was small, buried on page 6, former executive accepts plea deal. Greg's face stared up from the grainy photo. Older and grayer than I remembered. Mom. Megan touched my arm. Are you okay? Better than okay. I turned away from the paper. The Foundation's doing real good now. That's what matters. Laura settled into her usual chair. She'd started volunteering 3 days a week after Rachel's sentencing. I visited Mom yesterday. The room went quiet. Megan busied herself with the files. She asked about you, Laura continued. About the Foundation. And she cried. Actually cried. Said she finally understands what you were trying to tell her that night at the station. The memory of Rachel's breakdown still haunted me, not because of any satisfaction it brought, but because of how empty victory had felt in that moment. My phone buzzed. Michael's message read, lunch. Have news about the expansion project. Go, Megan said, reading over my shoulder. We've got this covered. I gathered my things, but paused at the door. Laura had moved to help Megan sort applications, their heads bent together over the desk. 2 daughters of broken homes, building something new from the wreckage their parents left behind. Julia. Laura called as I reached for the handle. Thank you. For not letting revenge destroy everything. It nearly did, I admitted. If you hadn't found those files on your mother's computer. No. She stood. Thank you for showing me there's more than one way to face betrayal. Mom. She never understood that. The morning sun caught the Foundation's new logo on the wall, a phoenix rising, Meghan's design. Below it hung a simple framed quote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Greg. Meghan told me about the scholarships. "You did good, Julia. Better than I ever could." I didn't respond. Some bridges stay burned, not out of bitterness, but because the river has changed course. Outside, Michael waited by his car. "Ready for lunch?" "Almost." I watched another volunteer van pull up, more students spilling out to help. "Just taking in the view." He followed my gaze. "Thomas would have loved this, you know. Using corporate money to actually help people. We all would have loved a lot of things," I said. "But sometimes you have to build something new instead of fixing what's broken." A familiar car pulled into the lot, Detective Morrison's. He'd become a regular donor after the case closed. He waved as he passed, carrying what looked like more scholarship applications. "Julia." Michael's voice softened. "Do you ever regret not taking full revenge when you had the chance?" I thought about Rachel in her prison uniform, Greg in his plea bargain suit, all the evidence we could have used to bury them completely. Then I thought about Laura's smile when she helped students fill out applications. About Meghan finding her purpose in rebuilding what her father nearly destroyed. "Revenge would have been easier," I said finally. "But this is better." Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning the battle, but in choosing which wars are worth fighting. And sometimes healing comes not from tearing everything down, but from building something new in the spaces left behind. Michael took my hand as we walked to his car, and I felt the weight of the past finally release its grip. The future wasn't perfect, but it was ours to shape. And that was revenge enough.